Welcome back to the Modern Middle. Last week we touched on didn't touch on, but we covered the Mueller investigation.
Yeah, we did.
On Donald Trump. Yeah, so we think we figured out the sound issue for the podcast, so that shouldn't be an issue here on out.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Hopefully we'll see how it goes. But what did you guys think of the Mueller investigation, what we did?
Well, I mean, of what we did, I think we did a decent job. There was some things that, we probably could have hit harder, but, I mean, we crammed a lot into 2 episodes over about 2 hours, I think, and yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of information. We did a lot of research, put a lot of time in just to try to lay out a fair story, And
I don't think either of us or any of us knew like how in depth it was and how much went into it.
Yeah. Not at all. It was really complex, especially from when you're looking at it from both sides of the house. There's a lot of contradictory information, pulling out what's true and what's false and what was just over exaggerated in general, just for the bias. Was definitely tough. It almost made 2 complex conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of what we're seeing now, right? All the fallout after we posted that episode, really since last week. We see calls from the GOP to investigate the FISA warrants.
Yeah.
We see calls to basically counter-investigation into, Fusion GPS and all that.
Yeah.
And then you see, the other
Which
side
I think
of the
is
house.
fair, too. Yeah.
Sure. And you see them
of
pushing
course.
for more information on the Mueller report. So, it's no one's given up on each of these conspiracy theories, and we're at the point now where we, don't technically really know what to believe, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's crazy that, that's the biggest story right now.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much is conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
People like conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and I think David was the one who came up with the concept for this week to have a little fun.
Yeah.
So
I thought, we're sitting there talking about basically just conspiracy theories that, the news is pushing, whether it's the left news or the right news, they're both conspiracy theories at this point because we don't have the evidence we would need to prove anything. And we spent so much time propping up these conspiracy theories that, some people just take as fact, and don't even ask questions. It's let's let's talk about conspiracy theories. Let's have a little fun with it, right? There's so many that people know just off the top of their head, and there's so many that they probably don't unless they're a conspiracy theorist. And, we could take that and maybe just have some fun talking about conspiracy theories that do have really the burden of proof to kind of show that we've been misled or something like that, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a lot of conspiracies in our past that have been proven true, proven false. It's just a very complex issue, and it's just that skepticism of the information that you're given. It's just crazy. I mean, I don't know.
And I think, we've actually had, in kind of preparation for this episode, working through a little bit of research on the conspiracy theories that we wanted to touch on, we realized that
That's
sometimes,
surprising.
and it's sometimes hard to really know, who's telling the conspiracy theories. So, do you know about flat Earth, or you know about this or that? Like these conspiracies, well, who's really the one pushing the conspiracy? Let's take something very, very well known. Let's say JFK assassination, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is it the government that's pushing the conspiracy theory?
Yeah,
because there is the truth of what really happened, and then there is what we were told, and so
and there's what people believe.
Yeah, and then there's the conspiracy theorists who are trying to
Who actually
prove
just
that
may
there's
be people who are onto the truth.
Maybe they're showing the truth, right? And that's the thing is that this is why it's interesting to people, because there's a lot of motives behind why people create conspiracy theories, why people continue to push them with bias and really refuse to look at confounding evidence, right? So we thought up front here we talk a little bit about conspiracy theories in terms of what they are and maybe what might motivate them, right? And when we look through all of the different conspiracy theories that we could have picked for to cover on this episode, you see a certain set of categories, kind of things would fall in. So up front, this is probably one that a lot of people are familiar with, because we found out that apparently the 9/11 conspiracy theory is when you look at polling data, it's something 54%?
I think we said it was the highest one.
Oh, it is. More people believe that 9/11 was a conspiracy than people that believe in aliens, which is pretty crazy.
Which was 46%.
It was 46.7.
And I think also we should preface a lot of the things, a couple of the subjects that we touched on, people died. We're not denying any of that, and it's awful, but we're more focusing on the evidence that supports that there was potential. What happened and what we were told isn't really what happens.
Right. And so what we saw a lot, well, not a lot of, but definitely some key conspiracy theories that fall into this category, which is called false flag. So people might have heard of this term, false flag, and basically that's just, in a lot of cases, it's the government or an institution essentially staging an event in order to, really sway the public opinion so that they can do some kind of agenda, right?
Correct, yeah. It's just that initial motivation. It's all about the motivation for why this conspiracy was formed.
And it's usually a big tragedy. Like, when it comes to government, it's usually...
At least that's what the claims are, right? That's what we're seeing.
So. Some of them weren't as big of a tragedy. Sure. Like when you're talking about Operation Northwoods and things of that nature, they did want to do some things that were going to affect the people, but I don't think it was really as much harm as, like, in terms of comparison to 9/11 or things of that nature.
And to take that one specifically, Operation Northwoods is one that we know was a conspiracy theory, that was a false flag, that was kind of proposed to JFK but never actually happened. But we have the documentation that, like, they went to him and were like, hey, maybe we should stage this event so that we can start a war in Central America.
Maybe that's why he was assassinated for not signing. Well, I mean.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, that's a beautiful example of how
conspiracy theories start.
They can snowball,
You could dig yourself into that rabbit hole.
So there's that, right? There's definitely, and we're going to cover some that fall into that category. Then there's other ones that are just motivated by essentially like anti-establishment, like this idea of some deep state that's got some kind of conspiracy to, defraud the public, and so people will create conspiracy theories in that realm just because they're against that establishment, right? Another way that people will get motivated to do these things is just an ideological attachment, just kind of, their worldview is just kind of integrated into this idea that now this theory comes out, this is what everybody believes.
And it's opposite to what they believe, and they can't deal with it.
So they have to find some kind of way to, like, make sense of this that they can live with themselves, right? Or live with, like, what just happened, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then the last one is just like basic skepticism, right? I mean, there's some people out there that proclaim themselves as skeptics. And so this is just kind of the arena that they live in. And as long as they're being skeptical in a fair way, in a non-biased way, and just kind of being skeptical of everything that they see and not having like a huge bias, then there's nothing technically wrong with that. But I think we know that, like, it's difficult for people to manage their biases.
Yes.
I think a lot of times with, like, conspiracy theories that are started on skepticism and just skeptical information, it's mostly based upon those ones that are, like, changing the way that people's way of thinking in general, or, like, it's a theory that disproves a different theory, and they kind of want to still keep the roots of that other theory and just go against that. So it's definitely hard to say where that motivation's coming from with this theory.
And one of the things that we kind of going to be the recurring theme, if you will, with all of the conspiracy theories that we touch on today is really just like, what is the burden of proof for these things, right? I mean, we have this sort of status quo narrative that is being challenged by said conspiracy theory, right? And so what amount of evidence would make people actually believe that, or what amount of evidence should we accept in terms of let's call it, undeniable proof, or just kind of, the existing story is not plausible anymore once we know all these things. And so that's difficult, because the burden of proof for something that's the status quo, we know when majority rules, right? Like, if 50-70% of the public believes something and you think that you have facts that counteract that, like, that, even if they're solid, right, that's still going to be tough to do, to change everybody's mind to now believe this new sort of marginal theory, right?
Yeah, sure.
So what we decided to do, and maybe I'll just hand it over to DJ for this, because I think this was his idea for like a format for this episode, which is to kind of just like rate these things. Like, let's just give like a plausibility scale.
Yeah,
right?
That's pretty much like, if we just have like a plausibility factor of like maybe just a scale from 0 to 10 or something along those lines. How true do we think, or how much of this information do we think it makes it believable, or nothing? We're not trying to say any of these conspiracy theories are true or false, or prove them or disprove them, because that's why they're conspiracy theories. They can't be proven, they can't be disproven. We just need to see how reputable the information is and how possible it is for these situations to actually happen.
So 0 would be like, it's just asinine.
Yeah.
And 10 is like, it's totally true.
And again, like I said earlier, right, we have to be careful, because it's like, who's pushing the conspiracy theory, and it's kind of, sometimes depending on the topic, it's easy to get wrapped up in like, wait, which narrative are we trying to prove or disprove here? So the 0 is kind of like whatever theory is being presented, like in this case by us, right, which would be the counter narrative to say something that everybody believes or what have you, right? Whatever is being presented, right, we're rating that on a plausibility scale, right? Because that's the narrative that we felt, had evidence that's worth bringing to the viewers here.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to try and rate those as we move through. We've all picked a couple, and we're probably not going to spend too much time on each of them. So, if you want more of one of these, if you want us to dive into any
absolutely.
particular one, like leave us some comments, let us know. Definitely want that feedback because, the whole reason for doing this was like, let's have a little fun with conspiracy theories that, basically everybody knows about and that, don't get us all emotionally invested in like current events where, it can just get heated that way, right? So let's do the same kind of thing as we did last week, except, these are going to be a lot shorter segments. We're going to cover, I think, a total of 6 conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it should be good.
So, the first conspiracy theory that I chose was the conspiracy that we never went on the moon. And this is one that's been around for a while, and it's like I don't understand how people even think like, why didn't we?
It's a huge conspiracy.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because there's there's a couple arguments like that it was staged, that there was like. That there was like the rock props, and there was the lighting, all that stuff, and the flag waving. So like as I was looking into it, there was like a lot of things that I like couldn't really even believe why it would be a conspiracy theory. Like the biggest one to me is Russia, because during that we had the space race, and Russia was really trying to beat us, and they came out and they were like, yeah, the U.S. went to space. Like, why would they have any reason?
Went to the moon, right?
Yeah, basically. We went to the moon.
Yeah.
And, like, why would Russia, who we were fighting, to get to space, come out and say that if it didn't happen?
Yeah.
Like, they'd be the ones that proved that it didn't. So, some of the evidence I found, one of the biggest arguments is the flag waving.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, this is an argument for the theory that we didn't land on the moon.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Okay. So they said that the flag was waving, and since there's no,
atmosphere on the moon, so there couldn't be any wind.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, it's an object, and they're going like this. Like, if you look in the video, they're twisting.
But they're moving the flag.
Yeah, and it's sticking straight up, so it's not falling. So.
There are also like solar winds and stuff too, and things of that nature.
I mean, there could be, but I mean, the fact that it's stuck up, if there was, it would have fallen down.
Just because there's no gravity doesn't mean it's going to be stiff as a board, like a flat piece of paper. It's definitely would still move to be put in that
And I think what they did, actually, I think you can tell in the photos and the videos that they they knew that there wasn't going to be gravity on the moon. And so they, like, kind of bridged the flag with, like, a something that was stiff so that it would hold it open, because they knew, like, it's just going to do whatever it's going to do.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the other arguments was there's a rock.
Right.
So there's this rock. When you zoom in, it looks like it has a C on it, and it looks pretty clear.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one I never even heard. But as I was researching it, but when you zoom out, like, it's not there. So they said it's pretty much like it was something on the lens.
And to me, I don't necessarily buy that method of refutation, right? Like, I think that, like, who says that there couldn't be just a naturally formed C on a rock, that's not, to me, that's not the proof that we would be like, oh yeah, that's definitely not the case in the case of that rock, that rock could have been a real rock that just happened to have, like, something that was made in the shape of a C naturally, Stranger things have happened, right?
And one of the other big arguments was the lighting, the shadows. And back then, like,
that was the argument that we actually did land on the moon, though, not an argument against the moon landing, correct?
No, there was an argument that, like,
because the shadows were parallel, right?
Yeah. No, because they said, like, to recreate the shadows of what, like, in the moon, when we were actually on the moon, they didn't have the
technology.
Yeah, the technology to get the lighting.
Yeah, they basically said they would have had to use lasers.
Yeah.
Right.
And so many of them that would have been more expensive
than like how much money was in the world or whatever.
So the fact that lighting proves that we did land on the moon is essentially what I was trying to get.
Yeah.
So that is proof for us going to the moon.
Yeah, if they were to use normal like stage lights, you know, that they would use in Hollywood or whatever.
Yeah, that would have
the most advanced stuff at that time. It wouldn't produce the same shadow because they wouldn't be able to. I mean, the case for the moon landing is that the sun's like 90 some million miles away, and so by the time it gets to the moon, it's pretty much parallel.
Yeah.
But if you had a light source 10 feet away, all of that light would be kind of spread out.
Yeah. And another one was the radiation belt. So we have a radiation belt around the Earth, and the conspiracy theory is saying that we would never survive had we flown up there through the radiation. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, it's a decent argument as well, if you think about it. Because,
theory, yeah.
Yeah. But the space shuttle was so insulated that they only had, it was comparable to when you get a chest x-ray, the radiation you experience.
Which is
nothing. Which is nothing.
Yeah,
it's minimal. And the fact that there was 400,000 scientists like involved in this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And if it was fake, you would have had multiple accounts of people coming out on record stating that this was fake.
Yeah.
For sure. I actually saw a photo the other day there that had like the footprint that Neil Armstrong made on the moon.
Yeah.
And then it also had the picture of the rover.
Yeah.
And it was like its foot was above the surface, and it like didn't make an imprint. It was like, well, how does hidden weighing this much make this imprint, but this rover doesn't even make an imprint on it? Which, I mean, it's hard to...
Comparing the tracks between the rover and the footprints, I see.
Yeah, but they didn't even show the tracks of the thing that landed on it or anything like that, so it's like very blatantly obvious.
Come on.
Yeah. But I mean, like, there's so many arguments and there's so much proof that disproves that theory. And I just think that this theory is complete bullshit. Like, I don't...
Well, there was, I mean, for me, because we were talking about these, and I was kind of looking into them myself, right? But there was that episode of Adam Ruins Everything, right? Yeah. And I think he did an amazing job at kind of just, like, breaking all that stuff down in a really cool way.
And if you watch it, like, the woman who's the conspiracy theorist in the video, like, towards the end, she just starts screaming, like, all the arguments, and he makes it look like it's that insane that what she's talking about. It
but what I was going to get at was the reflectors, right? Yep. I think that is, like, the proof. That's the smoking gun. It's like, no, we totally landed on the moon.
Yeah, I'd say, no, it's, like, the last thing I was going to touch on.
Okay, I didn't
No, that's fine. Yeah. I'm pretty sure we made the point that, there's plenty of evidential proof.
Yeah.
And, like, the reflectors in Russia, to me, were one of the biggest things.
Yeah.
Because like Russia, why would they?
Yeah, well, like I'm saying, like they Russia during that time was known for just like releasing tons of propaganda about their advancements in space and getting to the moon and whatnot. And we look back at it now, like historians look at what happened in Russian history, and they realize that like they were just feeding massive misinformation to the public about what their progress was.
Yep.
I kind of just wanted to hit to everybody as well the reflectors that they were talking to, and we were all talking about was we have reflectors on the moon that we could shoot a laser up today, and we will still return the light to us from the reflectors from the moon. Just for clarification, it's definitely crazy that if that's there, then how would they have gotten there?
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing is, like the conspiracy theory is we never went to the moon. Like there's also, they said that moon landing never happened, but that we never went to the moon. Yeah. And we've been back to the moon, like 6 different trips.
Well, and we know that, like, even before they landed on the moon, there were multiple Apollo missions that, like, were gonna land, but then ended up, like, just wrapping around the moon and coming back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's tons of astronauts that have either, like, orbited the moon and come back or landed on it, and, like, they do interviews all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And how could they, multiple times cover that up? There's just no way.
And we looked at that list, like what's the percentage of the U.S. that actually believes these things? And the moon landing was actually at the bottom of the top 10. It's something like, it was in the 30-something range.
Yeah, it was a lower percentage. I mean, this is still a top list, so it's definitely one that's still highly believed.
So 30% believe we didn't land on the moon.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's 30%.
That's still a lot of people.
It's still a decent chunk.
So, I mean, is there anything else you want to add before we give a vote on that? I think, like...
Is there anything else anybody...
So the plausibility of the evidence that you've given to say that, we definitely did land on the moon. Again, this is the narrative. So you're disproving the conspiracy theorists that say that we didn't, right? So the plausibility of what you're saying is already backed up by the status quo.
Yeah.
I think that adds to its, plausibility just from the start, right?
Yeah.
And then the evidence that you've given, I mean, if I was going to give a rating, I'd say that's at least a 9. I mean, I don't know if we can really go to a 10.
No, you'd be like a 1.
Well, the plausibility of your case that you made.
The plausibility.
Which is like the story that the government has given us that we did land on the moon.
No.
I think we should be the plausibility of the
we're
conspiracy.
rating
I see.
conspiracy
Okay,
theory.
yeah, let's
So
do
how
that.
plausible is it that this conspiracy theory is true?
Yeah.
So
okay.
I'd probably say on the lower scale.
I'd say 1.
Yeah, I'd say 1.
I can't, fully prove that we did. I wasn't there, and anything is possible. But no, I'd say it's.
And there are some weird things. Like we saw the one thing that how there's like an image of like the first spacewalk. Now this isn't landing on the moon, but again, it was all wrapped up in the space race. But they basically superimposed like a training mission that they did on Earth into something they took from space. And they've been able to kind of prove that they must have like kind of doctored that, right?
Yeah.
But there's plenty of reasons why they did that, and that was earlier on when they couldn't get like good film back, So that weird stuff is like present, but it's still like we know that we landed on the moon.
I'm actually going to go a little bit against you guys. I mean, I'm probably going to give it a plausibility factor of like a 3.
Really?
Because
What's your reasoning though?
government agencies and the information that we are getting is from a government agency, and I'd like to try to be as skeptical of the government.
Yeah.
So anything you're talking about, all this information we're getting that does prove this theory is true is coming from the government, and we haven't had a private industry that has done this on their own yet.
Yeah, I mean, they're getting close.
We've gone close.
Closer,
I mean, SpaceX is starting to do amazing things in space.
Yeah.
We have seen
we're
going
landing
in space.
rockets.
Yeah.
We're like routing them back.
Yeah.
It's insane.
We'll get there.
But as of right now, the NASA is the only group that has.
And what was it last week or maybe 2 weeks ago? Pence made an address where he was saying he's giving NASA like 2 years to get us humans back on the moon.
Which
so there's like this new revived kind of like let's get back to the moon. I'm not really sure what for, but
I mean, I think we have the same time frame to get to Mars.
Maybe it's just maybe it's just to put this conspiracy theory to bed. Let's
be.
do it one last time so we can shut everyone up.
Yeah.
Maybe. But then there would be new ones.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So so you give it a 3, we give it a 1. I mean, overall, I think we'd say it's a 2. I can live with that. It's still not plausible that we didn't land on the moon. It's just it would take so much coordination. It's just not.
I still think anything under a 5 is pretty much going into this isn't really
right?
where we would think it would be.
Because if it's conspiracy theory that goes against it's going against the status quo narrative, like it takes a lot. It takes a lot of proof to be able to overturn that. So
for sure.
I think when we think about these numbers, like anything under a 5 is we can almost just throw that out.
Yeah.
And it would take like
and
maybe a 6 or 7 or 8 to really go, we should maybe look into this some more, right?
Well,
agreed.
Okay. Speaking of non-plausible and NASA and everything NASA's saying is false, let's just why don't we go into flat Earth theory?
Okay.
So flat Earth theory is
it's fun.
It's fun.
I feel like
funny,
it's 2000. It's like the 2000s didn't land on the moon theory.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's
their parents already were taking on that.
Yeah, exactly. That's
theory.
here, children,
We
have
need a
my
new one.
conspiracies.
Add on to it. We're gonna just keep making this thing grow.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, I guess we should give
fill us in.
a brief rundown of what this theory is. It's essentially that the Earth is a plate, and on the outside of the plate is the ice wall. So gravity isn't real. Everything NASA says is lies. All their pictures are doctored.
They don't believe in any
They don't
photographs.
believe anything.
Just don't even show them a photograph because it won't work.
And these guys have a miraculous way of disproving themselves. Definitely has happened on a couple occasions watching through, I forget that name of the experiment, the one with the boat.
Some light experiment, yeah.
Well, the one with the boat was the original experiment that the light experiment was trying to do.
Yeah.
But essentially, flat Earth theory stemmed from an old experiment where a boat went down a river and a guy with a telescope stood at the other end and he was watching it with a telescope. And it's like, oh, well, if it's this many miles away, I shouldn't be able to... Right? 6 miles, something like that. Yeah. I shouldn't be able to see the boat anymore. I shouldn't be able to see the full boat. And it dips. It would dip under the curvature of the Earth, but he could supposedly still see the whole entire boat in the telescope.
Right.
And I think people have done this in cities that are across stretches of lakes and stuff along those lines, where they've still been able to see the city, especially in like Minnesota, Twin Cities, and all of that.
Yeah.
Which I think we have to realize that our vision and everything is directly affected by light and how light moves around the Earth. And I think that one experiment that we were watching kind of showed that. He was like, well, if flat Earth theory was true, we have these two boards, and we're going to shine a light through these holes. This light will show up in our camera if it's at this height.
So wait, just a little background. He's explaining an experiment that a group of flat earthers put together to try to prove that the Earth was flat. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. So they were trying to prove the Earth was flat by shining a light through one board, and it would hit the camera on the other board. And they ended up saying like, okay, if it's at this height, the Earth is flat. If the light is at this height, that means the Earth is round. Yeah, it was like 4 feet difference, or something along those lines.
So when they're like looking over the video,
he's like, I can't see it.
I can't see the light.
He's like, put your hands way above your head.
And then he finally sees the light, and he goes, interesting.
He goes, this is interesting. Like, he literally disproved himself on camera.
Oh, yeah, but sure. I'm sure they found some mental gymnastics to do to continue to believe what they believe, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. My favorite thing is the people that do believe in this theory, just because we have people shooting themselves in rockets and hurting themselves. And
that dude, I mean, good for him. That's
he's
awesome.
dedicated.
Yeah,
but that's insane. But like, could you imagine like being that passionate about something? Like, I'm gonna build a rocket. I'm gonna shoot myself up.
We're wrong.
It's like, no, man, you're crazy.
No, yeah, definitely pretty nuts. I wouldn't do that. I don't think, but
it'd be fun though.
And I think there's actually been, since then, there's been a lot of other people besides NASA that have been shooting rockets into space just to see the curvature of the Earth. I was watching a video that a rocket shot up, and you could see the whole Earth clearly. It wasn't too far up into the atmosphere or anything along those lines.
I've watched the one video where some flat earthers put together a weather balloon and some cameras, and they send these weather balloons as high as they could get them in the atmosphere, and somehow they got the video recovered, right? But they're showing the balloon just kind of rising, and you eventually see like the whole Earth as a circle. And apparently, like, that was proof to them that the Earth was flat, right? Is that like the Earth was a circle from that camera angle, you know? And that, like, even as far as they went up, it was still a circle. They were never seeing a globe. And I'm like, well, why would you ever see a globe?
It's a flat picture.
Why don't they just have two people on each? Oh, I guess that wouldn't.
Yeah.
So
I know, right?
Was the ice wall on the outside of that circle when they were seeing it? Because, I mean, that's like a big
tell them what the ice wall is. So I don't know if people know what that
is. Well, yeah, I mean, like, lay out the map, right? Because for them, like, they kind of, like, have rearranged some things.
Like, we mentioned ice wall, right? People are like, what the hell is he talking about?
So, essentially, the ice wall is the border around the disk. So, Antarctica actually encapsulates the whole Earth.
Around the outside
of the plate. And that's actually what holds all of the water on our planet.
Yeah. Oh, and gravity, right? You said they don't
believe in gravity.
The only reason that we don't, the plate is always moving up.
The steady pace. And the sun rotates around the Earth.
So,
and that's how the seasons are made. They say it circles it, and it actually goes up and down, too. Yeah. So that's what causes the different seasons and the night and day.
I have not.
Yeah, I would love to see a visualization of that. If they could put that together for me. I'm interested.
Like a PowerPoint presentation, like.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about the dynamics now, though, I mean, of how the solar system we proved to work and how we're spiraling around the sun, but that's actually spiraling around the galactic center. It sort of is. That's a tricky visualization to encapsulate in itself, too. But
yeah, but I just feel like they've regressed.
So is a flat Earth.
Like, no, that's at least this one. Like, ours makes more sense. I feel like a plate in space scientifically doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it just goes against physics, right? So let's talk about the light thing, the ship, right?
Yeah.
And so we know what, like, science explains why this happens.
Yeah.
Like, he calculates this distance of, like, 6.5 miles, something like that, you know, and that's where he's, like, taking his measurement, or trying to. And he realizes that he's still seeing the boat, right?
Yeah.
And, like, anybody that uses a telescope to look out at the stars, any astronomer knows that there's basically like refraction from the atmosphere. So whenever the light enters our atmosphere, it starts hitting all these particles, and it will be refracted one way or another, right? And that's called atmospheric lensing. So any of the light rays that are coming through, like into his telescope that are from that ship, are being refracted over the atmosphere, right? It's curved. Your atmosphere is curved. And so he sees this kind of refraction of light. Because eventually, I mean, I would love to see, like, how did he just have this ship, like, keep going? Like, did he get to 10 miles? Did he get to 30 miles?
Yeah,
like,
I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure at a certain point he wasn't able to see it anymore, right?
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay. But another weird thing about it was, like, the book he wrote about it, he released under a different name. So he, like, didn't even believe in his theory enough to like put his name on it. He was like, I'm going to do this.
Oh, right. Parallax.
Parallax.
That's what it was.
He put his name under his Parallax.
It's a pseudonym.
Yeah, definitely pretty interesting.
I would too.
Let's
be honest, yeah.
But yeah, it's
and these guys, I mean, if you've seen like Eddie Bravo on Joe Rogan or some other flat earthers kind of getting into this stuff, you realize like it takes a lot of work just to keep that up, because everywhere you look, there's things that refute it, right?
I feel like they keep adding stuff too.
Oh, they have to.
Like I believe that there was at one point a Pac-Man effect.
Oh, right.
Where like when you play Pac-Man, you get to the end of the board and you appear on the other side.
I think that was before they added the ice wall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was pre-ice wall.
Yeah.
So people were like, "Yeah, you don't fall off the edge;
No,
you just come out on the other edge."
It's like Pac-Man.
I think one of the biggest things that I should point out about this conspiracy in general is this one is more along the lines of playing into your own confirmation bias.
Sure.
This one is very much so much they're not taking any of the debunking information or material and equating that into the whole theory. Whenever you get into other theories and conspiracies, you kind of see a little bit of give and take with that information.
Absolutely.
This one, they're kind of just compounding a lot of false information and not taking any truth.
Yeah, and we talked about the moon landing, and I think that for a lot of people that started the flat Earth conspiracy theory, they already started with that platform. Like they had already convinced themselves that we didn't land.
Yeah, you can never tell them any different.
Yeah. So it's like it's a testament to how like believing one conspiracy theory kind of sets up this notion of doubt in that individual that's just going to cause them to kind of like, I don't want to say get addicted to conspiracy theories, but like you said, like they keep adding stuff because people refute it, and they're not going to give it up just because someone refuted it. They got to find some new way to jump around that, right?
If I had to put this in the theory category, it would be more of the anti-establishment, just wanting to go against what the norm is for everybody else. They kind of just want to be different.
I mean, how much attention have they gotten?
If
that was our goal in creating this, just to be.
Yeah, you can make careers, you can make money off this. I mean, why not?
Yeah. Okay, so let's
plausibility.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with a 1 on this one. I do not really think it's plausible. It's very low on my scale. And not only is it low on my scale, but the moon landing has to be completely true, too. Like, the moon landing being a hoax also has to be.
Well, yeah, we covered that.
Yeah.
So we all believe that we landed on the moon.
Yeah, so if I have a low plausibility on that, apparently this one's going to be lower because both of them have to be true for it to work.
Yeah, I mean, among many, many other things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'd have to go with a 1, or, I mean, I'm tempted to say 0, but...
I'm saying like 0.5.
Yeah, it's like somewhere in between 0 and 1. But let's go with a 1 just to give them a benefit of the doubt. Because let's face it, they've done a good job at pushing this.
And I guarantee you they keep it up.
Oh, they're not stopping. No.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So what? We got 2... Well, we got a 2 and a 1 so far.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one that we're going to cover is actually within the false flag category. And, I mean, we touched on the Northwoods, was Operation Northwoods, was that false flag that was kind of part of JFK administration. I'm not sure who brought it to him, but at any rate, they didn't actually go through with it. This is a false flag that we actually look at now and go, this was a legitimate false flag.
Yeah.
And that's the Gulf of Tonkin, which is actually this little skirmish, this little incident that happened off the coast of Vietnam in 1964, where we had some destroyers that were sort of they were patrolling international waters, something to do with keeping an eye on like communist nations and things like that. And they were like radar boats and really like comm ships for the most part. And so what happens in like August of 64 is there's this destroyer ship called the Maddox, and basically it's a Navy ship, and they get word that the Vietnamese are sort of planning some military action in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is where the Maddox is. And the Maddox is like has some really advanced radar for the time and things like that. So they pick up these communications. They realize that like there's basically trouble ahead potentially, right? And on August 2nd, they were actually attacked by 2 patrol boats that were Vietnamese, or at least what were assumed to be Vietnamese. And there were some torpedoes fired at the Maddox, the U.S. Navy ship. But ultimately, like there was no damage to the ship. There was a plane that flew by on August 2nd later that evening that saw the boat completely unscathed. So, I mean, that incident there on August 2nd was something that was confirmed for the most part, right? But ultimately, like there was no damage. They were firing at these patrol ships that were apparently firing at them, and then the patrol ships, being smaller and faster, just ran away essentially.
Gotcha.
So, 2 days later, August 4th. They catch some other chatter about more sort of military operations in the Gulf of Tonkin, and the Maddox goes out. They were at port at the time. They go out to sea just so they have more sort of like maneuvering capabilities. So if they came from one side, they could go somewhere else and evade them. And the Maddox goes out. It actually later in the day gets basically like a similar attack. I think this time it's like 3 boats. At least that's kind of what they're reporting. The difference between August 2nd and August 4th here is that on August 4th, the seas were really high, right? There were like 6-foot waves. There was all this wind and kind of like fog and low visibility. And for some reason, their radar equipment on both of these boats that are involved in this incident, the U.S. Navy boats, even the captain said that these radar things, they were getting false positives. And so ultimately what is reported is that the Maddox is fired upon, and not that they're fired upon. The Maddox sees all of these radar blips showing up, and they're like, they're confused because they'll show up and they'll go to like investigate, and then nothing's there, and then they see another one from a different direction. They go and there's nothing there. So there's like these sort of ghost hits on their radar.
Yeah.
Eventually they start firing. They start like this skirmish, like I said, with these perceived threats that were attacking them. So word gets out, and I think this was like 3 hours that this happened. So they're just like it was like something like 400 of 3-inch shells and depth charges. Like they did all these different kinds of ammunition that they ended up using.
You actually said that the waves were like 6 foot high, and these were little boats. That's supposedly the scout boats that they were saying was being used to attack.
Yeah, they were smaller.
If they were smaller, I was just wondering if maybe they had the capabilities of going through such high waves or treacherous waters and that.
I think they would, not as easily.
Yeah, for sure.
But it just
the ability to move and maneuver around and just run away that fast and stuff might be hindered, I would think. But.
Well, with the waves, yeah.
Yeah.
And so this whole skirmish happens, like I said, it's like 3 hours, and then really what's reported, and some of this is like what we know now, and some of it is kind of what was reported then. So I'll try to keep it clear. But what we know is that later on, after that, right as that skirmish was ending, there was a plane that had been called from a nearby aircraft carrier to fly overhead and kind of scout it out, right? And what he's quoted as saying was, what did he say here? I had the best seat in the house to watch that event, and our destroyers were just shooting at phantom targets. There were no PT boats there. There was nothing there but Blackwater and American firepower, right? So that's the guy flying overhead. And Herrick is a guy that was a captain of one of the other boats, not the Maddox, but I can't remember the other one. I think it was, I'm not going to speculate. So he realized that the attacks were actually a result of like over-eager sonar operators, because this boat was supposed to have like this state-of-the-art sonar, and so there was a lot of pressure on their sonar people.
Titanic wasn't supposed to sink.
Probably brand new technology. They didn't know about the false positives as much at that time, especially like testing it within a storm like that.
Yeah. So what do we have here? So the interesting thing is that whenever the news gets to Hawaii, right, and Hawaii's kind of like the closest naval base to relay a message to, news gets there from Hawaii, it gets to, the government, the president, the people that need to know, Joint Chiefs of Staff, things like that. When all of this information is delivered, and this is something that we know now, is that President Lyndon Johnson, who was the president at the time, when he got word of the attack, he commented privately by saying, "For all I know, our Navy was shooting at whales out there." And so he's quoted as saying that, we can't really prove it, right? What was ultimately done was this information was taken to be fact. It was taken to be that we were really attacked, and that was used as a conspiracy theory to give to Congress, right? So there's plenty of people that have looked into this stuff and said, it's pretty clear that the president and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they at least just chose not to believe this idea that this was just sort of a, an incident that was like all with U.S. ships, right? Yeah. There were no attacks, and they were just kind of shooting at nothing out there because their radar was going bad. I mean, this is good information they would want to include if you're trying to tell a fair story, and they didn't include any of that stuff when they told Congress, and so they went to war in Vietnam. I mean, that's how the whole war in Vietnam started, and we know that like that was a pretty big thing that impacted the course of American history, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Supposedly one of the biggest failures of American time is like how we started that war and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, so we have other things like in '95, the retired Vietnamese defense minister comes out and says that Vietnamese gunboats had attacked American destroyers on August 2nd, so he admits to that first attack. And I don't think he gives a reason as to why that happened, but he vehemently denies that they had any interactions on the 4th, which is what all of this is about. I mean, it's not like we were going to start a war on the 2nd, It was what happened on the 4th that really caused us to do something there. So the other interesting thing is that right after this happens and we sort of like Johnson gets, I don't even know if he really needed approval to intervene and really start a war in Vietnam, because what happens after this is that Congress started to I think Congress realized through this, or something came out where they realized
something's up.
We need to make sure that you, as a president, you can't just start a war without coming to Congress and getting approval. So they passed the War Powers Resolution in 1973, and apparently Nixon tried to veto this, but it still remains in effect today. And this is the law that says like no president can just go to war without Congress's assent. So we still have that rule because of what happened here in Vietnam, and so this is a conspiracy theory that was peddled, pushed by the government as a false flag to get us into Vietnam for, we didn't really even dive into those reasons as to why. But
my confusion with that is like, if Lyndon B. Johnson did start this war based upon that event, and he also came out and said, well, for all I know, we could have been shooting at whales out there. Doesn't that sound kind of contradictory for him to start that war and also make those claims?
So that was a private quote.
Oh, okay.
Right. He did not say that publicly.
Okay.
Someone later on said, whenever I was there, and I'm not sure who it was that reported that private quote, but they said he commented privately that we could have been shooting at whales.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of evidence that proves that like we didn't actually get shot at. That the Maddox, that destroyer that was in the Gulf of Tonkin, didn't actually get destroyed. There was another plane that flew by that night that like said that they were unscathed. That there was nothing.
Got destroyed?
No, nothing sank in any of these two events.
Well, I mean, in the report, did it say that the Maddox was destroyed?
No. So his report to Congress and to the American public was something like, attacks on Army and Navy vessels, needs to be met with an equal reply, and that reply is happening right now. I mean, he was basically telling them, like, this is what happened, and we were already going to war, So I think that was one of the first times that we can look at in history and go like, well, this is a pretty clear point where the government at least perpetuated false information to get their way, right?
Yeah. False flag.
I don't know if you guys want to talk about anything else on this story. There's a lot of like timeline stuff of what really happened over in the Gulf of Tonkin. But
didn't you also say like a commander asked for confirmation or?
Oh yeah, so
that was
Herrick, who I believe was the captain of the other boat, not the Maddox, but he said, because they were both firing at nothing. Essentially, they were having the same issues on their radar. When he relayed the message to Hawaii, he said at the end of it something like, "This should be thoroughly investigated before we take further action." Because what he was saying before that was essentially, we can't prove that anyone actually attacked us. We just saw some weird stuff on the radar, and it was nighttime, like we couldn't see anything. We started firing at them, But ultimately, they were never able to prove that anyone actually know their boats were really attacking them. So, and that's pretty much. I mean, I think as far as facts and timeline stuff, that's really all I need to cover about it. But I mean, it's an interesting story,
Do you think it was planned?
Do I think it was orchestrated from the beginning?
Yeah.
No. I think it was an opportune moment. That's just based on what I read.
They just messed up, looked like idiots. And
they realized, hey, this is a great way for us to get into Vietnam if we were thinking about it.
Especially if 2 days before there was an attack and they didn't think it was enough to push on to it.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why, like, guess I'll say I didn't know much information about this subject beforehand. My plausibility factor, I would say, is probably like a 4. Are we going like plausibility that this is?
Yeah, so this one's tricky because it's really the government that has the conspiracy theory, right? Because they pushed that we were actually attacked by boats. And all of the facts that we look at now say that we weren't. Right?
Okay, so pretty much the plausibility factor would be that we weren't actually attacked, and that...
Yeah, what's the plausibility that we were attacked? Because this is, right? The government pushed the conspiracy theory. The truth is... Yeah. The truth is out now, essentially. If you choose to believe it, right? Yeah. So the conspiracy theory is that we were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin, and that was the reason. That was good enough reason to start the war.
I'd say it's probably a 3.
Yeah.
2 to 3.
I would probably say a 3 or 4 that they attacked us.
Yeah, and I think and back then, everyone just assumed that's what it was, right? So back then, plausibility was super
back then
high,
you didn't have social network.
What we know
the
now,
investigative journalists, the people.
And what we know now, I would say it's a 3.
Yeah, I think the only really aspect I rated that high was because of the attack 2 days prior. If that attack was proven, that kind of shows that there's substantial ground there to do it again.
Even if they were shooting at nothing, there's a potential that somebody was somewhere.
Yeah, sure.
But I'd still say it's...
I mean, even though the plane didn't see things and stuff, when you're talking in a storm, when it's wavy at the nighttime, there's a lot of camouflage in boats. Boats are darker. They're made that color so they can blend in with their environment. So it's definitely highly possible that there were boats there. They just couldn't see where they were at.
I'm still on your side, though, with 3.
Yeah, and I think we all... I think it's a fair
assessment.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I had a lot of trouble trying to think of my second one. And ultimately, I ended up going with the NSA surveillance conspiracy theory. So,
to lay out the conspiracy so we can try to keep it in mind.
So the conspiracy theory is that the government is spying on us. That they can tap our phones, they can tap, Facebook, our text messages, photos, all that stuff.
And that was kind of an assumption ever since the technology age took off, right? I mean,
I don't know if it was ever. I think people maybe thought about it, but it wasn't really relevant until the whole Snowden, Edward Snowden.
Yeah.
When he came out in the WikiLeaks and the NSA. Okay. So this goes back to 2001, after 9/11. That's when the Patriot Act was put into effect, and that's when we were starting to develop pretty much software that can catch targets for potential
terrorism.
Yep. Yeah. So that's what it was initially designed for, and then it came out that years later, Benny, who
William
was a former,
Benny.
Yeah, he was a former operative. He worked inside, and he said we shift our focus. Like originally, we made this for terrorists, targets that we think are a threat, but they start shifting their focus to American citizens.
Right.
So right there, why would they do that? So what happened was Snowden was working for the CIA.
NSA.
No, he worked for the CIA
Oh,
originally.
really?
He was a contractor. Yeah. And then he wasn't agreeing with stuff that they were doing, and he said that things were getting shady there. Mm-hmm. He didn't go too far into it, but then he went to the NSA. He got a job, and that's when he started contacting. Her name, I believe, is
Julia something, right?
Yeah, she was a
Poitras.
She was a director who does documentaries. And
I think it's Julia Poitras.
Poitras, yeah. And he contacted her in Greenwald, and he said, I have some information that I want to put out, and essentially he leaked all the NSA information about how they're surveilling, their government surveillance of people, individuals, how they can do text messages, they can do Facebook, they can collect photos, emails, they can collect whole inboxes.
What did he say? Something like, oh yeah, all I need is an email.
Yeah, well, he came out and he stated, all you need is a personal email address, and I can find anything I want on you.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and it was ruled unconstitutional when information came out, and Bush said they could have done this from the start, they're allowed to do this. Then essentially Congress vetoed it and overturned and said this is unconstitutional. You can't do this.
Supreme Court? I don't know if this went to the Supreme Court.
I don't think it went. I'm not sure if it did.
Yeah.
But I know Congress ruled.
Yeah, because I feel like Congress might have the ability to put regulations on those agencies.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that was actually Comey.
James Comey.
Yeah, he refused to reauthorize it.
Okay.
So this was.
Yeah, when was it?
So that's why he said, when was it?
Yeah.
2004.
Okay, so it started late 2001. Well, Patriot Act.
Yeah, in 2001 it started. And then in 2004, that's when they realized that they were collecting information, because essentially it's a big dragnet.
Yeah. That's actually not a long span of time either. I mean, if you're thinking about it, if they just started this because of the Patriot Act, they realized that we were already in war with terrorism. I mean, we're still spinning up around that time frame and stuff. So
yeah,
but maybe they just.
Yeah.
As soon as they realized it, they kind of cut it off. In a sense, it doesn't seem like it lasted.
And this conspiracy theory is interesting. As like I said earlier, I think I don't know. I guess skeptics or people that believe other conspiracy theories, this isn't hard for them to believe. You know, the government's spying on us. Oh, they would never do that, right? Like everyone's like, yeah, of course they're spying on us.
But I don't think people realize too that.
Well, they didn't know the depth of it.
Yeah,
they didn't know how far, right?
And there's and we'll post the sources when we post the video. But there's a website that just, because the government has the authority to do 3 hops. So like on Facebook, if a target, which is there's algorithms and stuff in the software that searches for keywords, potential targets, stuff like that. It's 10 times more likely to pick up an American citizen's information than targeted info. Also, they have a 3-hop rule. It's a 3-hop limit. So if you have, 190 friends, it was upwards of the population of South Dakota. And once you got up to 1,000, it's 22 million or 26 million people.
Because of the number of connections that can exist there. Yeah,
exactly. So the number of people, information they can collect.
So 3 degrees of separation from any one target. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that are allowed.
Yeah, if they have that many friends. That's
and then it's essentially open season. Yeah, exactly. Is that what you found?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine if you're just friends with one famous person, like Lady Gaga, or an actual famous individual. They could literally go look at every single person that is on their
So they tell you be careful who you're friends with.
Yeah.
And they're currently every 3 seconds collecting a terabyte of data.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as people in tech, a terabyte of data is no joke.
Well, one thing I do want to say is one of the biggest data warehouses in the government's the Library of Congress, and they said they collect 5 terabytes a month.
Oh, you mean other than the NSA?
Yeah.
So number 2 on the list.
Yeah.
5 terabytes a month from the Library of Congress, who is compiling every document that exists in government that they can get their hands on, right?
All right.
And then you have the NSA, who's producing how many per second?
It looked
terabyte?
like when the labs added up to every 3 seconds, 1 terabyte.
1 terabyte every 3 seconds.
Yeah, it's on the website, and we'll post the source. But it's just, and that's now. And they were supposed to squash the project that was ruled unconstitutional.
When James Comey did not continue it, it was supposed to end.
But then Snowden came out with the information years later, and they were still doing it.
Yeah,
they never stopped.
I just wonder though, because we have that issue with, I forget what event it was, but the FBI was asking Apple to get them a backdoor into their phones.
Oh, I think it was the Las Vegas shooting. Yeah, I remember them trying to get that.
Well, there was an exploit that the government could exploit.
In order to get to it, they eventually found out how to get into the backdoor. And they were eventually never mind Apple, since Apple wasn't helping.
Well, they didn't release the exploit to the public. They kept it for themselves so they could gain information.
No, yeah, for sure. They definitely probably did. I'm just saying, it just, I would feel that the NSA would probably have access to those text messages. I guess it might not have been text messages they wanted to get. Maybe they wanted location data or something along those lines. But I think a lot of the data they would get for the NSA that they're probably taking is from phone records through the actual phone companies.
Well, why don't you cover that? Because I know you have some information on sort of how the NSA goes about getting information from places like Verizon or AT&T, right?
So there was, let me see.
It's not like they have a hard line into everything in the database of Verizon, you know?
Yeah, so a British Black Ops surveillance program run by the NSA's British partner, GCHQ. There was a secret court order requiring Verizon to give up like millions of people's data a day, like and
per day
to the NSA. Yeah,
millions of American citizens or just people.
It just says millions of Verizon to hand the NSA millions of Americans phone records daily.
Yeah.
So phone records, it's a very general term.
Yeah.
I feel like that could encase like text messages, emails, phone calls, pictures, any of that information. So they had a secret court order. Another thing is like you don't need a warrant. Like the NSA doesn't need a warrant.
Right.
Yeah.
They're not.
No, they don't ask questions.
They don't need to behold the client attorney privileges. They don't need to check out. Like they decide who they get to investigate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty much like open season for them. It's.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they've got enough loopholes out there that basically allow them to, like, if somebody in the NSA wanted to abuse these rules and find loopholes,
absolutely.
they could pick any random American and find a reason to investigate.
He could investigate any way he wants.
Yeah.
From the comfort of his chair at the desk.
Yeah.
And to me, the reasoning is 2004, the information came out that they were collecting people's data without them knowing.
Right.
Then in 2013, Snowden released the information with WikiLeaks, and that was 9 years.
Right.
It should have been squashed.
And he released that stuff pretty quickly after he left.
Yeah, it was 4 days. I believe he flew out Greenwald. I think he had
Hong Kong, right? They met in Hong Kong.
Well, they had email communication for a couple months, and he was like feeding information, saying like I have information that I need to get out, stuff like that, and then he flew them out. The director in Greenwald, and like 4 days later is when they announced that it was him. He was the informant. And Citizen4, like that's where some of this information's at. The documentary that was made by Poitras.
Right. Yeah.
It's a really good documentary. You should check it out if you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen stuff on Netflix for this. I
don't think it's on Netflix anymore, but it's. I think everybody should check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, if you have it.
But so I have no doubt, but I think it's a very good possibility that they are monitoring us and they're doing whatever they can.
But they definitely were.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then they were supposed to have stopped it in 2004, but Snowden and all of the stuff that came out there leads us to believe that they're still kind of doing it, right?
Well, my question is, like, what is the level of monitoring? Like, if we're throwing this up on the plausibility factor, are we saying, like, there's only certain events that people do that causes them to start recording their data? Are we recording all people at all times? Essentially, what...
Well, they're never going to release what their keyword searches are and stuff, you know?
Correct. Yeah, like, I understand that, but...
Well, the thing about it is that, like, the Dragnet is 10 times more likely to catch American citizens' information than... Target's information.
Correct.
So why wouldn't they use that data?
Use the data for everybody?
Yeah.
See, that's where I'm kind of thinking. If we were talking about 3 terabytes, I would probably say the possibility factor of them recording specific individuals' stuff, and we're talking. I mean, that is a lot of data. Don't get me wrong, but let's say like they have like 200 different video feeds that they're recording because they think it's very pertinent information. That's a lot, and they're recording from those cameras 24/7. That's a lot of data right there.
Yeah.
So we do have to realize that terabytes are big, but when we're talking about the video files and the video quality that they're saving these recordings, that's going to be a large.
Yeah, but I feel like that's just a claim that you're making. You don't know.
Well,
I mean, I know the size of video data.
He's presenting something that's a plausible explanation.
Yeah, for like those large amounts.
But I don't think you just assume they have this much video files, like this much. I mean, they're talking about cell phone records. They're talking about text
voice
messages.
calls.
They're talking about.
No, and I understand.
They're talking about
especially
taking
with those are smaller data.
Their whole inbox. Why are they doing that?
Well, if they think
because they can.
Skeptical, I mean, they should have took Hillary Clinton's whole inbox.
Yeah, right.
Maybe they have.
So that the NSA had it.
Let's give them a call, see if they have it.
Yeah, right. They're gonna share that.
So is there anything else you want to add?
I'd say
something you want to debate about. Because I feel like you're ready to get into a heaty debate right now.
Not really a heaty debate. I don't know about the plausibility of them recording everybody's data. I think I'd probably rate this on a 5 or a 6.
Well, let's take the conspiracy theory again, so we know we're all talking about the same thing. Because there's different degrees of spying here, right?
What's essentially like...
So what's the plausibility the NSA is collecting our information and spying on us?
At all.
On us. Like,
Americans.
Us as Americans?
Yeah. Okay. We can do that.
Targeted... There's a big difference between targeted... That's my confusion. Like, spying on us here...
Or we can do I guess, two different ones.
Yeah, for like us here, like, do I think the NSA is collecting our data right now as we're talking, or like looking through our YouTube videos or stuff like that? I don't. I think that they're going to try to pull people, well, maybe because we're talking about political topics or something along those lines. These might be keywords. We wouldn't know what that is. But I think they're only...
We might already be on it.
We might already be on these lists.
Hey, NSA.
I've been really researching the NSA a lot lately, so...
That's very true.
How you doing?
But I think it's mostly going to be selected individuals in certain things.
And here's the thing, right? Like, when you spy on the public to try to find, essentially, like, let's call them double agents, for lack of a better word, but, you know, it's people that are American citizens that are still acting out terrorism, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's your target, then you're going to end up having a lot of duds, you know? And so you've got to spy on the Americans to find the Americans that are the terrorists. So
here's the thing. Why do they have a secret court order to Verizon to hand over millions?
Well, maybe they were...
Records?
Well, it's bad PR, obviously.
When you're talking about phone records, too, like, in order to find who's double agents, you need to find what phone records are contacting different phone numbers that they might have on a list. Like,
listen, I'm not saying
I just feel like this is an extreme. It's an extreme example.
No, I'm just trying to explore the plausibility.
We're talking about double agents. I'm not talking about double agents.
Well, no, that was bad term.
No, I'm just saying, like, in context, they're going to want to look at all the phones that they were contacting.
Right.
So, like, I think they would first get the phone records, see which phones in these phone records were contacting numbers from different countries, sketchy information, and then from that, maybe dig into those individuals further. So, like, those phone records and who they're contacting is kind of going to be their base background of who they're going to want to investigate.
Yeah.
And I just kind of see it as... they're skimming through, and that's going to be like one of the first stops, essentially, to try to like see who they do.
Do you really think the NSA like wants to listen to you, like you and your girlfriend talk on the phone? You know,
that's essentially.
I feel like they want to listen to the U.S. and see what they're doing.
But I don't think it's not.
It's
really,
the conspiracy theorist in me.
Yeah.
It's not really like. I just think the plausibility of them being able to filter through all of that data all the time would be programmatically. Intensive.
So let's do this. Let's do two judgments here. One is basically because we're basically talking about the motives of the NSA.
Yeah.
Are they trying to spy and they're just looking at terrorism stuff, or are they spying on us, talking about what we're going to make for dinner?
Yeah.
You know, because those are the differences here. Those are the two extremes, right?
Yeah, I guess.
And I think the one where they're spying on Americans to find terrorism, and that's all they're looking at, like.
Let's not say what they're looking at, but what they're recording the information for.
Right.
So, like, even if they're recording the information for us when we're making dinner and stuff like that, to skim through it, but I don't think they're recording that far, is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I feel like they are.
I feel like they are, too. I'm just saying, like, me talking about what I'm going to make for dinner doesn't mean that they're going to be like, oh, he's a target.
I'm not saying that, I'm saying I'm pretty sure that they can just do whatever they want, whenever they want.
I think they can.
I
agree, and I think the plausibility factor of them being able to do that on whoever they want at all times, I would say is a plausibility factor of an 8, in my opinion. 8 or 9.
I would say a 9.
I definitely think they've Snowden and everybody that has leaked this kind of information has proven that they have the capability.
They have the capability.
For sure.
I just meant more or less not that they don't have the capability.
But if
they actually act upon it because of Congress, I would say the plausibility factor is around a 9 or a 10. That there's no terroristic backgrounds behind them recording your information.
Yeah, I would agree. I would go with like 7. I mean, I think it's easy to like sort of implant kind of a nefarious motive to the NSA, because when anyone's spying on anyone, you think they're doing it for the bad reasons, you know?
And not only that, it's just such a covered up government agency that's not really talked about. Yeah. I mean, everybody's going to think about it in whatever light they want.
It's ominous, you know, like, ooh, like Big Brother is watching and listening, you know, and so people are likely to believe, like, that's, like I said, who thought that they weren't spying on us, you know? Yeah. So the plausibility of that is really high. I'd say 7 for me.
The plausibility of them having all of the information of all of our conversations and storing everything, even including like our Alexa conversations and stuff like that, I would say is lower. I would say that them having all those recordings stored, I would say that's like a 4, in my opinion.
I'd say it's 7 or 8.
So yeah, I mean, this is tough because I know that they could, like, if they wanted to.
If they wanted to, they
could. We've already said, like, well, if they can, then why don't they? So they have the big data, so they can run their algorithm on it and find the terrorists, right?
terrorists?
I might be more with Justin here. Like I think they do.
Yeah.
I think they can and they do. Because
maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hover around between 5 and 7 on these because I think that they're definitely spying on Americans, and I think that there's a big part of it that's for good reason, obviously.
Yeah.
And they've even shown that they've caught terrorist attacks through this program.
I just think it's this. The recordings are done more systematically.
People even came out and said what Snowden did really was dangerous. They endangered a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest thing is FaceTime, all of these new video talking conversations and stuff like that. That data is way larger of amount than terabytes a day. We're talking getting into the terabyte size. I mean, all of these exabytes, that's an asinine amount of data.
Too much. I mean, I don't know when that figure was from. Maybe they're recording even more data per second now, but
that was real time. It was updating real time.
I think we can sum this one up by saying the NSA is definitely spying on Americans. They probably don't care about what you're making for dinner, but there's a chance that someone at the NSA actually reviewed that conversation and was like, "Oh yeah, they're just talking about making dinner." So
I just thought it was a really fun one. It really interests me. It kind of always did.
It's good. All right, let's see. Our next one is me. I'm going to do a little bit on a program called MK Ultra. This is one that in pop culture, have you ever heard how many references there are to MK Ultra? They think of Avril Lavigne, Kanye West, who's the other one? Katy Perry. They're all MK Ultra. And so let's get a little background on this. MK Ultra is actually the sort of code name for the CIA mind control program that happened, started in 1953. And really what the whole goal of the program was really about interrogation. They were trying to, this was after the World Wars, and there was kind of this Cold War brewing with the Soviets. And so they were trying to figure out ways that they could get an upper hand on interrogations, like truth serums or knockout gas, stuff like that, so that they could, if they captured someone, they could get information from them. This is something that the Nazis were doing during World War II, and so I think that our government saw what they got out of that, and they were like, well, we should be looking at that stuff too. I mean, if they figured it out or they're researching it, then there's no reason we shouldn't, right? And so in 1953, this program gets started in the CIA called MK Ultra, and I mean, ultimately it went for something like 20 years, almost 20 years it went on.
That's that long.
Yeah. Ultimately, it was said to be halted, which we'll get into in a bit, in 1973, which was 20 years later. So there was a, I believe, a congressman who had written some stuff after it was halted in 73. I think he was someone who was pushing for it to be discontinued, and he was talking about how in 1953 there was this quote-unquote paranoia at the CIA when the U.S. had lost its nuclear monopoly and fear of communism was at its height, right? So the CIA was kind of grasping for straws on ways to reestablish their dominance in these wars, right? And so they were interested in these mind control mechanisms. And so really what they ended up doing was just testing a ton of drugs on a lot of times on subjects that didn't ever give consent, and even slightly fewer times people that didn't even know they were being given any drugs, right? So they signed up for some experiment, and they're just oh yeah, what are we doing today? And they're like, oh, here's some water, and then they drink this water, and then before they know it, they're tripping on LSD, and stuff like that. So I mean, there were deaths that were attributed to what the CIA did in this program, and it goes pretty deep. I mean, basically what we know now is that the CIA had created front organizations where they were funding these research programs across 80 different universities and hospitals and different locations that would do, let's call it psychological research or any kind of human-based research, right? And so the CIA was creating these front organizations to then fund these universities, and to the universities they think, oh yeah, we're just getting funded by this organization that wants to do research on this drug, and then behind the scenes the CIA is doing it, and even the CIA, as it's been proven that they were doing their own experiments on their own subjects through whatever means they had, right? It says in some cases academic researchers were funded through grants from the CIA. That was like sort of like on the books. This wasn't even like black money, you know what I mean? These were public grants that they put out there, and universities like, oh yeah, look, we can get this grant, we do this research. They didn't even know that they were contributing to the MK Ultra program.
It's pretty wild.
So
good scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the participants who actually started this whole sort of movement outside of the government, one of the he goes down in history as someone that's a very famous person that was part of MK Ultra, was this guy named Ken Kesey. And he's the one that started kind of the counterculture hippie revolution, right? But what happened was he was writing this book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which some of you may have heard of. It came out in 1960. But to kind of supplement his income while he was writing it, he participated in the MK Ultra program, which is where he was introduced to LSD and I think mescaline and like other psychedelics. And that is what he sort of learned something from the government, you know, like he was part of this program, and then he realized like he could bring these drugs back to his friends in San Francisco, and they started doing these acid tests with the Grateful Dead, and before you know it, like the hippie movement is in full swing, right? And so it was really the government that really like opened up this can of worms when it comes to drugs, right? Like they were just like, let's experiment with all these people, and then all of those people were like leaving the program and, you know, like realizing that they could find ways to make LSD or find ways to buy it, whatever, right? So it was definitely some negligence on the part of the CIA in terms of how they were conducting all of this.
The government messed up?
Yeah, right. Like I said, it goes pretty deep, though, because it wasn't just it wasn't just like individuals part of experiments. Like they were actually giving LSD and all of these different drugs. I keep saying LSD because that was the main one they did research with, but they were giving them to CIA agents and army officers, like people that were working in the leadership of the program. Yeah.
Did they do it knowingly or unknowingly?
Well, both. So they said that like, you know, someone else in the program kind of like what was that guy's name? I think I have it here. Ultimately, like Netflix made a docudrama about this guy. Frank Olson, thank you. So Frank Olson was one that was kind of a subject of other people in the program. They decided, like, let's start like feeding him acid without him knowing and see what happens, you know? As that was all like part of it. It was like they can't know that they're getting this drug because then they might not tell us the things that we want them to tell us. So he eventually committed suicide. He jumped at, but he jumped out of a 13-story building in New York City, and the coroner that investigated that death said it was injuries consistent with a murder, even though he jumped out of a window, right? So there's a lot of shady stuff. Like they even joked about it in one of the memos, saying that like accidental LSD trips were just kind of an occupational hazard around that program, where like they would just accidentally get dosed with LSD and then they'd be at work like, you know, having acid trips, you know.
That's pretty wild.
So yeah, they studied other drugs. I mean, most notably LSD, but morphine, mescaline, psilocybin, this really crazy drug called scopolamine. I think Vice News put out a really cool documentary talking about that drug and how people like literally black out and they will do anything that someone tells them to do. And so it's like a really big problem in South America apparently, but. So they're studying all these drugs to try to figure out if they can use them against their enemies, essentially. But they're really kind of like fomenting this drug culture in America at the same time, because they did it on such a mass scale that all these people are like, oh, we can go join this program and take drugs. I mean, what's to stop people from doing that on the street, right?
So isn't that when like Nixon started declaring the war on drugs?
Yeah, so we get through the program, you know, like I said, it was ended in 1973. Nixon declares his informal war on drugs in 1971. So that's before they closed this program.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure that like he did that based on the findings in this, because what was also going on was, you know, we touched on Vietnam earlier. There were a lot of vets coming back addicted to heroin or addicted to morphine. Yeah. And so there were probably a lot of reasons why he did, but it's just convenient that, you know, coinciding with the war on drugs, they quote unquote like discontinued
there was a big drug boom with the CIA's drug tests.
There was a lot of people. I mean, might be a result of MK Ultra, but it was also fighting the hippies a lot during this, because he wanted to go to Vietnam, and the hippies were trying to protest Vietnam. So it was just war on drugs. It's how
So there's one more really interesting piece to this story, which is that, this is a CIA government program for 20 years. And so they accumulated a lot of documentation, not only within the CIA, like Langley office, but also at all those 80 institutions that were scattered out across America. So when Nixon's in office, 1973, Richard Helms, who was the CIA director, apparently directed someone kind of under him to go to the Langley office and destroy all of their MK Ultra documents. So this is actually one of the pillars of the Watergate scandal, was that they went to this.
I remember you telling me. Yeah.
They went and got all these records, and they went to the furnace and they burnt all of them.
It's fine.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
that's all right.
Well, didn't you say some some survived because they were mixed in with?
So there were 200,000 pages of MK Ultra documentation that had accidentally been filed in financial records, which were stored somewhere else, like in the archives or something. And it wasn't until I think it was the 80s or 90s, someone actually looked at them and was like, "Wait,
oh, shit!
Wait, yeah, look at all this stuff." So they discovered through essentially the stuff that the CIA didn't know that they didn't take care of. They had destroyed everything else through Watergate.
They're like, "We're good."
Yeah. And then they just found these misplaced documents that gave us all the information that we do have now, which is really interesting, right?
Equivalent of deleting emails.
Yeah, right.
I mean, there's another story I could get into too, which I probably won't give too much info on. But it's basically this village in France that thought that they had a mass hallucination because of a mold that was growing in their harvest of their bread, wheat bread. And that was what it was chalked up to until the 90s, when there was a CIA agent that came out, combined with the records that they found in those financial archives, that the CIA was talking about that town back then, and they were talking about how it wasn't the wheat, it was them. They were actually putting hallucinogens in the food supply of this town in France.
That's pretty ridiculous.
It's crazy, yeah. So it's very well documented that they were doing, number one, very unethical things, and it was actually after this program where when these documents were found out, where they passed a law on a federal level that you can't do this kind of research without the written consent of the person that's participating and something like a uninterested third party, like another witness, right? So they kind of
made
learned
legislation.
They were let's not do that again. So there's a lot of evidence that points to this being a very unethical, very just corrupt way to go about this kind of business.
Handling this research and So what are we? I mean, a lot of this is information that we have, and it's out there. There's a lot of evidence of this. What is what are we talking about for the plausibility? Why are we rating whether this type of thing is still going on? Are they still using these practices?
Well, and so I talked about pop culture in the beginning. The people that peddle this conspiracy theory say that it's still going on under this, MMC is the acronym. It's something mind control, mass mind control, maybe something like that. So they claim that it's still going on, and that they've said that Kanye West is MK Ultra now, that he was brainwashed. And that he looks different. The idea is that they're training with these drugs, that they're training a Manchurian candidate to do whatever they want, to do their bidding, so they can program someone.
Well, I mean, even if you think about it, the way our TVs and the way pop culture is set up, and how those people and those figures influence larger groups of people, they're using these figureheads to kind of brainwash entire groups. And essentially followers of these people.
So, if they wanted to do this to mislead the public, they would pick those pop culture stars.
I mean, essentially, if you're talking about Kanye West,
now he's pushing Trump.
Now he's pushing Trump. This is the complete opposite person that you would think would.
He said George Bush hates black people. Katrina, right? And then 10 years later,
now he's all for Trump.
And people are allowed to change their mind, but I mean, he went from one extreme to another, and he is a big pop culture figure.
I'm not calling Donald Trump a racist or anything along those lines, but you would see Donald Trump having more compared to George Bush. I don't know. I guess I couldn't really say that. I don't really know too much history about George Bush being a racist or anything along those lines, but I would say there's more things that would point towards Trump being.
Just because of what he says.
Just because of what he says, his rhetoric, his mentality.
I think that's fair.
But so the idea is that it's still going on. That's the current conspiracy theory. That MK Ultra is an active program, still just turned into a different name, and that they're still controlling people's minds with not only these drugs, but probably other drugs that they've and other substances they've come into research since then.
I would probably say 5 or 6.
I would probably say up there, especially when you're talking about that one, the one that started with an S. I forget this.
Scopolamine.
Scopolamine. If that one really has like that much of an impact, if they do utilize that on some of these mass figureheads, and if they do get some of these people brainwashed with some type of drug, what they know, I mean, they're apparently going to do something along those lines with that.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't want something out of them.
I'm not like fully convinced, but I'm pretty sure you're onto something. Like that's why.
Well, and I think there's 2 parts, right? There is like the existence of the MK Ultra program, which is like you can't really. There are people that were in that program. They're like, no.
I put that at 10.
Yeah. And then there's the idea that it's still going on today. And I actually, what did you guys say for
like a 5?
Still going on today. I'd probably say a 6 or a 7.
I mean, I'm actually going to go lower than that, which is kind of odd for me because this is the one that I researched and I just, like the evidence of like Avril Lavigne and Katy Perry, these things. If this is the modern day evidence that we would look at to say that they're still doing this. It's not good enough for me.
Granted, I'm not saying that we utilize drugs in order. I mean, I guess that was like a whole bigger than MK Ultra. I just think there's definitely still some mass brainwashing going on. Is essentially what I'm thinking. I still think they probably have these back channels to try to get mass brainwashing. Doing it to political, like these public figures and stuff like that, might be more of a stretch. That I would probably agree. I would probably go on the lower side of the scale.
I'll go with a 5 on that. That it's still going on. I think it's possible that it's still going on, but the evidence that we see is not convincing.
I think you would know.
Well, that's another thing. Like we're talking about this when you're saying all these people from MK Ultra came out, and then we're talking back with the moon landing and how all of NASA might be faking it with their flat Earth. Like we're having people in the CIA and NSA coming out and saying like this program happened.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't there be people from NASA with the moon?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Why wouldn't there be people now saying that it's still coming out? Like that's pretty arguably true. That it did at least
overall, it definitely happened, and whether or not it's currently happening, it could be. I mean, we're at a 5. That's
could not.
Yeah.
Right in the middle. Maybe not. They definitely had the motivations to do it back then. I don't know why they would necessarily stop. I think they ultimately just stopped telling us, and started hiding it better. Yeah. But that's we can't prove that they're still doing it,
Yeah.
So I think we're on to the last one.
Yeah. What's our last one here?
The last one. Big one.
9/11.
Of course.
This one is very sad. Granted, I want to come out at the beginning of this stating that we definitely believe people were killed. And we're not trying at all to say this is a fake incident. The stress. I mean, I know there's a lot of things with the stress actors and things of that nature. But people died in this incident. Definitely. Rest in peace.
Of course.
To the families.
But I mean, back to the other side of that coin, which is that what we talked about earlier in the opening. Like when we look at the top 10 conspiracy theories in the U.S. It seems like this is the highest one.
Number one.
54.3% was what was reported.
We'll agree,
yeah. I mean, how many memes are out there? Like now, you can't go on social media without seeing jet fuels don't melt still being somewhere.
So what's the conspiracy theory that you're proposing?
We're probably going to just do a quick rundown. There's a lot of information with this, and I kind of wanted to hit on a lot of the key evidence that kind of points towards that the government did have involvement, and a lot of the media that was portrayed to us about this event was incorrect. There's, like I said, there's a lot to dig into it, but I kind of want to just hit on one of the biggest things that I thought was the passport. One of the passports that we found at Ground Zero on the ground throughout the documentation of the World Trade Center was from the terrorist that was in the plane. The black boxes in these planes weren't found, but we found a passport. I mean, come on. It's definitely very tough, and especially scattered. They said they found it before the tower collapsed.
So let's just, real quick, this is another one like the Gulf of Tonkin, really, where what we're laying out here is that
the government started.
The government is the one that, I mean, we don't have to get caught up in this.
They were responsible for that.
They were the ones that in the end here were like, creating their false flag, right?
And I guess we should probably go over the premise of the reasonings for what the false flag would be. We kind of wanted to go over to the Middle East there's just oil industry and the
definitely
oil
motives.
Things. We have plenty of motives to be over in the Middle East, and this was the opportunity. Even when you're talking about Bush was friends with Saddam Hussein's family and for things throughout the past, I believe. And we were giving them actually weapons prior to 9/11 and all this things. So there's definitely some history there too that you kind of have to dig into for who we were going up against. So
let's lay out the evidence. We're going to lay out evidence as to why, the narrative that 2 planes crashed into, respectively, each tower, and then that alone was what caused them to come down.
Correct.
I think that's really the basis of what we're attacking, if anything.
For sure. So the premise of the building collapse, let's just start off there. The fact that the way the buildings collapsed, there was 60 plus structural engineers that have all said that the building wouldn't have fallen like that if from being hit by an airplane. These were all a symmetrical collapse of these buildings.
There were implosions.
Any idea how many stories? I thought there was like 100 and it was like 130 floors. It might be more. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I can't remember.
I was just curious because everybody knows of a building that they went into that was like 30 stories, and you think, that's pretty tall.
Yeah, for sure. And
but the World Trade Centers were huge.
They were huge, massive. And there's also, a lot of people don't know this, but there was World Trade Center number 7, which was across the street, which also
104.
collapsed. 104 stories. So there's 3 buildings that collapsed in this, where 2 of them were only hit. And the third building was, not as tall, but it was definitely still a pretty tall building. Which it was supposedly, and this is another thing that the structural engineers and people said, I actually want to pull up the organization that did the research on it. It was the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, which is a government agency, and they reported that the World Trade Center 7 was collapsed specifically due to fire.
Right. Now, it was in the 9/11 Commission.
It was in the 9/11 Commission, yeah. The people the other structural engineers, teachers and stuff along those lines said if they would have wrote the report that this NIST did for their classes, they would have completely failed them. There's no way that this information that was in this report was plausible almost.
Yeah. Right. It wasn't supported by any other evidence.
It wasn't supported by any other evidence that the fire could not have caused this structure to collapse.
It was reported in the 9/11 Commission, so then anybody else that's trying to prop up this false flag has the 9/11 Commission to point to and say, hey, it's what they found in their investigation.
Yeah, exactly. So
they're good too. Yeah.
And that's what the biggest thing is a lot of the evidence supporting 9/11, either the passport that was found, it was found from an unnamed person. They don't say who gave up the passport. This building, the research that was done on it was from a government, from the 9/11 Commission. It was just, all of the evidence seems to point like it's coming from the government and not the real research. When you're talking about the engineers and the people that are sitting in the civilian sector reporting on this, they all seem to point that something doesn't add up here. There's something a little sketchy and off about this.
So you mentioned earlier the passport, right? They said it was covered in jet fuel.
Yeah,
right?
Passport was covered in jet fuel on the ground. Didn't burn before the collapse of the buildings. It was found throughout all this paperwork. So in the midst of all of this, somebody's running away from the building because they see this explosion and they happen to look down at the ground. Oh, here's a passport. This must be the terrorist. It's covered in jet fuel. How does that happen?
It's very interesting that all that,
And didn't you say that they did analysis and found that it couldn't have actually? Tell us about that.
There's actually a lot of people that have done statistical research on the street that it was found. It was found on Vesey Street. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but they said that the street that it was found on is actually on the opposite side of the building that it should have been if it fell out of the plane at the side that the plane hit.
Yeah.
So this passport was found in a location that should be impossible for it to be in.
Yeah.
From a plane crash where the black boxes didn't even survive.
Right.
Yeah. Black boxes are made to withstand plane crashes.
What a miracle. Right. Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. We know exactly who did it because of that.
Another thing I read is right after the planes flew into the center, the CIA agents were going to the nearby businesses and demanding that they give up their footage. Camera footage.
Oh, really?
Of the nearby
suppression.
businesses. Yeah.
And when you look at it now, you can only find 2 shots of it.
Yeah. I actually didn't even look.
You can find the one in the Pentagon. You can find a couple.
Yeah.
Of New York.
And I remember when it happened, seeing a lot of different camera angles that were out there, different news stations. They had helicopters. They had tons of different angles and reporting on this. And when you look back now, I mean, you can't find much.
Oh, yeah. And honestly, I think, like, into this conspiracy in general, like, back in the day, like, if you were almost looking at this as a conspiracy, it was almost, you were portrayed as anti-patriotic. People just labeled you as, like, a crazy conspiracist immediately. But now as that's starting to dial down, more people are starting to believe. It's like you're starting to get into that higher percentage where over 50% of people believe that this happened.
I think that's enough. Don't we flip the script at like over 50%?
Yeah.
Yeah, but think about it. Like, even if they like grab the tapes to just investigate, like, you know, to see if there was somebody on, they would release them if there was no proof of anything they need. You know, why would they? When you don't see anything.
Yeah, and I get that. Right? I think the CIA has grounds to go around and collect the evidence,
absolutely.
Right? To get to the bottom of it.
Why hold it? You know?
And
unless there's something you're trying to hide.
Let's also be real. Like, I'm pretty sure that the CIA doesn't conduct investigations in the way the FBI does. Like, they're not tasked with like getting to the bottom of this. No. They're more like covert ops and like, you know, regime change stuff.
That's stuff you're never going to hear. Stuff you're never going to see.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just get on to a couple of the other.
What are the other aspects of it?
So, like, the explosion after Ground Zero. A lot of people felt the explosion underground as they were running away.
Well, the fact you say explosion.
Right. I guess we should clear that up.
No, but that's what they reported.
I mean,
that's what people said. Is they said explosion, which it wasn't an explosion. It wasn't an explosion.
Well, the planes, when they hit, apparently caused an explosion. So that could have been... But the fact that these planes were already hit, they were already... I mean, the buildings... This is when the building collapsed. Right. They felt an explosion underground. Right. And a lot of like the causation that people have said that might have been, or like the government may have said, was that the explosion from the planes traveled through the elevator shafts, across the hallway, down another set of elevator shafts, and then that's what caused the additional destruction to the lobby from the second explosion that they say might have vibrated the ground.
It doesn't sound very likely.
It doesn't sound very plausible. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy.
Was it, like 80 floors or something? I think it was like the 70 or 80th floor that it hit.
Well, didn't you say that? Then you also say like there's a bunch of elevators in them.
Oh yeah, there is like 90 elevators in each building. Yeah. Like there's not a small number of elevators in each.
So you need support.
And then when you're talking about several floors, I mean, there's probably laws and regulations for how many floors an elevator can go up. So like that's exactly why like they say it had to travel across the hallway to get to the lobby, because you have to go up so many floors on one set of elevators, transfer over, and then go up another set of floors.
Okay.
Which I could be wrong. I'm not 100% sure how accurate that information in the World Trade Center is, but the biggest thing is, speaking of elevators, is the elevator company that was working on the elevators in the weeks prior, doing modernization of the elevators is what they were doing. People that were working at the World Trade Centers, specifically one article that I was reading was a guy talking about his wife, how she said there was a different elevator closed every day, and there was continuously
What
elevators.
Were they doing?
Yeah, that's...
Modernizing the elevator.
They're modernizing it with maybe putting some thermite in them to make them go a little faster. Who knows? But
I think that also goes into like the little puffs.
Yeah, I mean, if you even watch video footage, there's like puffs of... You could see puffs going out of the different glass doors.
Like in succession, right?
Yeah.
Which is how the controlled demolitions work.
That is how they look and work. But if, let's say, like a building was collapsing on the inside, you kind of have to realize that this would cause air to blow out of the windows as well. If for some reason this plane crash did cause this incredibly symmetrical structural collapse.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning, I'll just cover it real quick, but it's not a lot of proof, but it's worth mentioning that there was a small plane that flew into the Empire State Building. I don't know when it was like maybe the 80s or something, maybe earlier. It was a small passenger plane, but it flew into the Empire State Building. I mean, they have pictures of the whole building just having like a whole collision and just ripped off of it, I mean, and they repaired it, and it didn't fall. Like, it was perfectly fine.
I didn't look up the dates of when these were built, but I mean, the structural regulations are meant to withstand plane crashes.
Right.
And they even said that the people that constructed the World Trade Center, they weren't incorrect. Like they engineered it and built it properly to meet those standards. So
listen, it was like 747, right? It's a huge airplane.
Oh, yeah.
Going into a huge building. So I'm not suggesting the Empire State Building evidence carries that much weight, but it's just that it seems likely that on this scale that, and we watched it. I mean, I watched it live. Like, the plane flies in, and it was, hours later? Yeah. I mean, it was at least an hour later, or 2, maybe 3, I can't remember, before they actually fell. I mean, they had enough structure to hold themselves up for that long.
Oh, yeah.
And then people hear explosions.
Yep. And the building falls. I mean, granted, and I haven't seen this footage. I remember watching this when I was younger and stuff along these lines, and it's very sad. But there's even, like, videos of people being shot out of the windows because of the explosion, essentially. Being shot far away from the building. It wasn't like they were just even jumping out, like some of the people to get away from the fire, but it was almost like an explosion forced them out of the windows.
I think another good evidence is the insurance policy.
Oh, yeah.
So this is another thing that's a little bit skeptical because, and that's another one that I have down. It's
very convenient, though.
It is very convenient, but he also did change the whole lease over to him. So it wasn't just like, he's already had this lease out, or he's already had this lease out on this building. I'm going to decide right now, okay, I'm going to get the insurance on this now because I know something.
Because the headline you hear the conspiracy theorists pushing is that, like, this guy opened an insurance policy a week before. Yeah. Well, yes, and also no, but because he had just bought the building.
He just got the building. Yeah, so, like, anybody that just gets a building is also going to get insurance on that building. But it also makes you wonder, like, did this guy know that these plans were coming up? Did he take over the lease on this building at this time? Because
it's very ironic.
It is, like, a very short span of time to get in there. But I just don't want to encapsulate it just on the insurance because, I mean, that's almost like saying insurance fraud. And if we see this whole lease transfer, it could have been for many different reasons.
Yeah, didn't you say something about how his payout? What did you find out about his payout?
He got like $4.5 billion, and like the biggest thing was the cost was like, I think it was like $9 billion for the buildings. The cost of it. And in order for him to even get payout that was closer to the building's cost, he had to claim it as almost 2 insurance claims. So he claimed it as 2 separate attacks, one for each plane. Yeah. And that was how it enabled him to he won and got more money than he was supposed to, but it still didn't even equate to the amount of
So damages. He still lost money.
He still essentially lost
But he still got billions in
He still got billions of dollars, and they didn't build the buildings back. So, I mean, you have to realize that he did still make he made out on the deal, I would assume. Yeah.
I mean, this one is deep. There are so many, and like we said, this is a very popular one, and there's plenty of other evidence that you could look at and go, that doesn't really line up, And
I do want to kind of hit on one other point before we kind of do our plausibility factors on this one, but we can't, like you said, there's so much we can't really cover everything. But one of the ones that I think points mostly to our government having some involvement in this is the FEMA operations that happened the day prior.
Right, I've heard about that.
The training exercises. So FEMA was actually set up to do training exercises for terroristic attacks. So they had all kinds of federal equipment there ready to help with 9/11.
So it was planned for September 10th.
It was actually, I think the training was planned for the 12th, but they arrived on the 9th preparing for the training exercise.
How interesting.
So they were there on the 9th, had the equipment there, used the equipment in 9/11, and were prepared to have this happen. So they essentially had all the equipment they needed. And there was actually other occasions where this sort of thing happened. I'm not saying any of these ones are other conspiracy theories too, but I mean, they even say like this FEMA operation is going to happen at Sandy Hook, which again, prayers. We definitely believe that people were injured and killed in these events. And the London bombings. I don't know if there was one for the Boston bombing.
Yeah, it's convenient whenever you hear. I think even there's plenty of times that I've heard this FEMA was doing this training on terrorism or on gun violence or whatever, and they just happened to be in the right place at the right time when a real event happens. Again, you can't call that evidence, but it is quite convenient when we're
you can't call it evidence, you can't write it off.
Theories, and honestly, if you kind of put this in line with the NSA conspiracy theory we have, what if the NSA tips off the federal government that something might be happening, so they send their FEMA there to kind of prepare for an event that they think might happen just based upon evidence they got. This doesn't mean they set up the event, but it's definitely means that they might have known.
Yeah, if the NSA had that before.
Correct. Like if the NSA had the information, told them.
I don't know if they had that program because the program was started because.
Oh, that's right. It's true.
But there is potential there. I had something like that in.
I mean, I'm sure that.
Like I said, I always assumed they were spying on us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But all in all, I think 9/11 has way more evidence proving the conspiracy than the evidence that we were giving to prove that it was Al-Qaeda and terrorists.
So plausibility.
I'm gonna give it a full-blown 10. I mean, I'm sorry.
Nah, I can't give it a 10, but I don't blame you.
Yeah. I can see why you give it a 10.
Yeah. Because 10, to me, a 10 is like you can't disprove it.
No, that's true. You know? I mean, I would probably say like a 9 or an 8 still. Okay. I won't give it a 10.
I would say 8.
I'm going to say 8 too.
Just because
I'd say it's very, very likely.
I mean,
this wasn't random.
I've watched controlled demolitions. That's I've watched like plenty of things like side by side. People laid out where like this is how this building falls under a controlled demolition, and this is the World Trade Center falling. And it's like, these people spend like months trying to prep this building to fall in that synchronous kind of way, and sometimes those still don't even go right, where it still falls a little to the right or whatever, right? And we watched 103 or 102 stories just drop straight down. It's like you can't just call that chance. I think. You know?
No. And I kind of want to like say what my concept behind the 10 plausibility factor was. It wasn't so much that the government was the ones that caused 9/11. I wanted to clear up that I think that's more for like the falsified information that we received. That some of the information we had definitely had some shady dealings. Like the passport, I don't think that it was plausible at all that passed. I think like that's 100% a 10. Like that was staged information.
Well, I don't know if we can even go that far, but it at least means you can't use that as evidence to then start a war.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even like you can even. I'm sure you guys can dig into us on your own and check out our sources and stuff, but there's so much more even about the planes being unmarked and different things. And possibly
and some of them get out there, right? But you can see how this kind of thing, there's this other term that's been floating around in politics called gaslighting, which is like when you do something that you know is wrong, like not true, just to make that person think that
question
they're crazy. And that's kind of like what leads to these conspiracy theories going way off the deep end, is because we're given this narrative that it happened like this, yet all the evidence points to this other thing, and then we're already like in the mindset where like people are going to call us crazy if we try to push this evidence in this narrative, right? And so it's like gaslighting on a mass scale, right?
Yeah, from government scale.
Yeah.
No, I think 9/11 was probably the biggest conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
it was something that we kind of had to.
Yeah, and I think it's only been in maybe the last 5 years or so where that figure has gone up to 50 or more percent. A lot of people did not want to accept that could be possible, that the government would carry that out.
How do you
Yeah,
you don't want to think that.
Totally.
I mean, we're also talking about a time back then where we were so patriotic. We wanted to be over in these wars over in the Middle East. We wanted to kind of get rid of this terrorism. I mean, there's definitely just a lot more patriotic individuals, whereas now we're coming to a point where everybody wants to spin down. And not only that, but ease of information. I mean, the internet and the technological advances.
Well, then think about it. Even from 9/11, they did the Patriot Act and they started spying on everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, I mean there's so many things
that they gained from.
Well, yeah, and it's like the same thing like you said with MK Ultra, right? They conveniently started their war on drugs, right? They conveniently started spying on everyone.
Seems like a lot of things
after this, it
seems like a lot of policies and.
I mean, it's
things
just
happen after these big
events, right? Yeah, and that's really what goes back to what is a false flag for, so they can push some agenda that without that false flag, they would never be able to get past the American public.
What I kind of think lines up with all these is like the availability of the technology. Like almost as soon as like we realize that these drugs are here and these people can do these things with them, and they're starting to do that, they try to do it. As soon as they realize they can start tracking everybody's phone information, they start doing that. As soon as like they have it's almost like as soon as we have this technology, they find a way to do it, whether it's to the public eyes or behind public eyes. They don't want to waste time. They want to be ahead. They start doing this research. So I mean, honestly, I feel like it's almost safe to assume that if some new VR technology or they think they could do something with it in the government, they probably are. I mean,
why wouldn't they?
Yeah,
just do whatever they want.
Yeah. Oh, and people say the government's the one that comes out with the technology years ahead of the private sector, right? Like when we get it. So there's that whole factor too. But yeah, we can't sit back and assume that, especially at this day and age, the government has like just got our back at every corner. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of things that we've covered tonight that really fly in the face of that. That like blind assumption of them having our best interests at heart and not, invading our privacy or any of those sorts of things.
They're going to work right outside that line. They're going to do whatever.
Well, they're pushing the envelope, right?
Or they're going to go over the line and just deny it.
Yeah. They'll work in that gray area until it's very black and white for them to not do that, and then they might still even do it. You don't know.
Right. So yeah, that's so. We just to wrap up, I don't know if we really nailed it down. We said an 8 on 9/11.
I think I'd go with an 8 or a 9. That the government's involved in.
Okay. Definitely. Cool. So yeah, and that's our spiel on conspiracy theories. We had a lot of fun. Yeah, we talked about this stuff a lot before.
And there was so many. There was some conspiracy theories that David, he was researching. He's like, I want to disprove these, and then he was looking. He was like, I can't. He's like, I read one thing, and I can't. So it was kind of fun, like seeing the development of our thinking and research, and it was fun.
You're gonna find evidence on all sides of these things, and we were talking about this before, right? Skepticism is a good thing, right?
Oh yeah.
I think it's also a little paranoid.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, You
just have to make sure you use it without that confirmation bias filter that like the flat Earth people have, and like that sort of thing where you just dig yourself into a rabbit hole.
Keep an open mind, but also be aware.
Yeah, and I think this is a testament to sort of what we want to do with what we do here on the podcast, which is we want to be skeptical. We're not going to be afraid to challenge ideas or narratives that are the status quo. But at the same time, we're not going to engage in skepticism and just hold on to biases, because we realize that when you do that, you end up with something like flat Earth. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're just ignoring all of the facts that might go against what you're trying to prove, and then you're completely off base.
One thing I was thinking about too is it's like a nice mix of book smarts and street smarts.
Right.
It's okay to look at what you're given, but also kind of use your head.
Yeah, step back every once in a while and think.
If something seems amiss, you might be onto something.
I think we realize disinformation or the fake news, whatever you want to call it, right? It's out there.
Oh, yeah.
And so there are pitfalls left and right when you're looking for information. So you have to be diligent on not discrediting something right off the bat. You have to give it its chance to present its argument, but at the same time you have to take that with a grain of salt, or try to find something that corroborates that. It's a lot more in depth nowadays, because you can't just take something you read as fact anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I'll wrap it up here. Like I said, we had fun doing this, and like I mentioned earlier, if we touched on anything that you really want us to dive into some more,
or there's something that we didn't that you want to,
either way, that maybe throw down some conspiracies you'd like us to investigate. Maybe we could do a conspiracies part 2. Come up with 6 more conspiracies that you guys gave us.
Yeah, I won't be opposed to it.
Make sure to like and subscribe.
Thank you
guys.
Thank you.
Watching.
See you next episode.